A common question among players of Twilight Struggle is, how do I best use the space race? While there are some obvious answers to that question, higher level play offers some nuance. We'll seek to give you some great ideas here on Legendary Tactics. The space race is a thematic mechanic that adds a lot of flavor and interesting choices to the game Twilight Struggle. But how do you use it well? We'll look at some ideas on that very question today. First of all, let's look at the track itself and review how the rules around it work. The first space, Earth Satellite, takes a 2-op card and a roll of 1 to 3 to advance here. It provides 2 victory points to the player that first arrives in this space and 1 to the runner-up. The next space, Animal in Space, takes a 2-op card and a roll of 1 to 4 to advance here. It allows the player who has arrived or passed this space the ability to play 2 cards on the space race each turn, until the other player has reached or passed Animal in Space as well. After that, we have Man in Space, which can be reached with a 2-ops card and a roll of 1 to 3. It grants 2 victory points to the first player who reaches this space, but nothing to the second. Next, we have Man in Earth Orbit, which is reached with a 2-op card and a successful roll of 1 to 4. This space grants a powerful ability, which is that your opponent must choose and show their headline card before you, allowing you to make your play with full knowledge of what your opponent is planning. This stays in effect until the other player reaches or passes Man in Earth Orbit as well. Then we have Lunar Orbit, which is reached by discarding a 3-ops card and rolling between 1 and 3. It grants 3 victory points to the first player to reach the space and 1 to the runner-up. The next space is the Eagle or Bear has landed, which requires discarding a card worth 3 operations points and a successful roll of 1 to 4. Being the first to reach this space allows that player to discard 1 held card every turn. After that, we have Space Shuttle, which is reached with a 3-ops card and a roll of 1 to 3. It gives 4 victory points to the first player to reach this space and 2 victory points to the second. Finally, we have the last space on the track, Space Station. To get here, it requires a discard of a 4-ops card and a roll of only 1 or 2. But the ability is quite powerful, which is that a player may take 8 action rounds every turn, which is a decided advantage if one actually can get here. At first glance, playing the space race seems obvious. Just send your opponent's events there to avoid having to deal with them. But one of the worst mistakes a new player makes is overusing the space race. Now, there is some debate about this, but in reality, advanced players rarely make it to Man in Earth Orbit, which is the 4th space along the track. The reason is simply that a round spent discarding on the space race, even if successful, generally yields momentum to the other player. Ops are needed every turn if possible to pressure or counter your opponent, but this won't happen if you play a card on the space race. Remember that cards sent to the space race are likely to come up again. If it is one of your opponent's starred event cards, wouldn't it be better to control the timing of the event, have a chance to mitigate it, and then get it out of the game? If it stays in the deck, it may reappear at a bad time or even in your opponent's hand, so the maximum damage can be wrought with it. There are some events, however, that are simply unplayable and must be sent to space. These are DEFCON suicide cards, cards that grant victory points when your opponent is close to winning, or any other card that would lose you the game. Cards like Destalinization or Decolonization that provide your opponent easy access to a region. Cards like Voice of America or Marine Barracks Bombing that could remove you entirely from a region. Cards that don't provide enough operations points to repair any damage caused, thereby mitigating the event. You may also consider spacing cards that do provide you with the ops to mitigate them, like Socialist Governments. This is because the card would leave you with an empty action round either way, and the thinking is that you may as well try and get something of value from it. Cards like Quagmire and Bear Trap that could, with some bad luck, give your opponent many turns in a row. Or cards like OPEC, which, given the board situation, would give your opponent a ton of victory points. The victory points provided by the space race are nice, but not game-changing. The USSR, who is generally trying to end the game in the early or mid-war, or even with a play of war games in turn 8, might be more inclined to want them. But the challenge, especially for the USSR, is getting to Man in Earth Orbit too quickly. This can prevent the spacing of the truly nasty US mid-war 2-ops events, like Grain Sales to Soviets and Voice of America. Having to play these events can quickly undo any advantage a temporary lead in the space race may have gotten you. For the US, it is also advantageous to keep options open, and to not advance too far, thereby rendering it unable to space a tough 2-ops USSR event. The abilities granted by the space race are helpful, but not all powerful. For example, the ability to space 2 cards with animal in space is nice to get rid of multiple bad cards, but will also exacerbate the issue just mentioned of advancing too far too fast. The ability to see an opponent's headline is the best ability the space race grants you, mainly because it is within easy reach on the track if you want it. It completely neuters surprise headlines like defectors, and forces your opponent to completely change how they play against you. If your opponent gets this ability early, you will want to put a good effort into catching up as soon as you can. Being able to discard a held card or taking 8 action rounds per turn are great if you can get them, and that is the key. It will cost you a lot of operations points and action rounds to get there, even if your rolling is relatively lucky. The momentum you give up in getting there will likely cost you the game before you can really enjoy the perks the space race has granted you. The website Twilight Strategy has provided a great list of all the cards you should consider sending to the space race, so please feel free to reference that great site for that and all sorts of Twilight Struggle strategy tips. I have covered a lot of the space race considerations elsewhere in the card-by-card breakdowns, but I will touch on things briefly here. For the USSR, the potentially unplayable cards which must be sent to the space race include CIA created if the Brezhnev Doctrine is in effect, Duck and Cover, Grain Sales to Soviets, Voice of America, Bear Trap, Soviets Shoot Down KAL-007, Star Wars, and Tear Down This Wall. For the US, Lone Gunman comes immediately to mind as long as you have containment in effect, We Will Bury You, Quagmire, and surprisingly, Ortega elected in Nicaragua if the US has influence in Cuba. There is also the classic US move of sending either or both of decolonization and de-Stalinization to space after the turn 3 reshuffle. This should be done whenever possible. The rest of the turns will be situational and will depend on the score, the board situation, and the game turn. Knowing how and when to send them to the space race will come with experience through repeated play. It should be noted that there are other ways to think about the space race. One of these is to treat the track as a region unto itself, and that playing aggressively into that region is a valid option. If you think about it that way, you will be avoiding more enemy events and going for the victory points and the bonuses which, with some lucky rolling, could help in significantly swinging the game your way. For example, successfully spacing a card like Defectors on turn 1 can be viewed as not only giving you 2 victory points, but also denying your opponent those 2 victory points, as well as the 1 victory point for avoiding having to play the Defectors card. So arguably, a 5-point swing. This could be viewed as effectively scoring a region. It doesn't suit my style of play, but I understand that there are going to be other approaches to this. We hope this guide to the space race and Twilight Struggle was of use to you, and I hope it helps you to win more games. Please take a moment to leave any thoughts you may have in the comments section below. This has been Legendary Tactics.